Please welcome record-breaking former NASA astronaut Peggy Whitson and former NASA astronaut, Columbia University engineering professor Mike Massimino.
Thank you.
Hey, Matt.
Peg. Thank you very much for the warm welcome. It's really a pleasure for both of us to be here. I'm here with one of my good friends, Peggy Whitson. We've known each other a long time, and we have a picture to prove it. Can we see it? Where is it?
No, I haven't got it up yet.
What's that? There we go. All right, so this is our official astronaut class photo. It was taken in 1996. You can see Peggy, you can find her very easily because she still looks the same. I'm a little bit harder to find. I am second row from the top, third from the left. And if you look at my head there and look at it now, this is what spaceflight can do to you. Okay, my hair was not this color back then, but Peggy still looks the same. But to get to this point, Peg, was not easy for either of us.
Not even the slightest.
And, you get this nice photo, it's like, oh, look, they're all that. But it took me 4 tries. I was rejected 3 times, and you had a similar
I was
situation.
rejected 4 times.
4 times. So to become an astronaut, the first lesson is you have to get used to being told no. What was it that kept you going to just keep trying when all those rejections came through?
Well, it was something that I had been striving for a very long time, and I always kind of feel that your path in life is not necessarily exactly a straight line. And it's important in looking back at those times and knowing that 10 years of applications turned out to be some of the most important times of my life. And that's something to keep in mind, because if you are always trying to make the most of your situation, even if you're not exactly where you want to be, you can always achieve so much more than you might even imagine. So I was doing some negotiations in Russia and things like that, leadership challenges that ended up really paying off and actually ended up giving me more opportunities when I later did become an astronaut.
Yeah, I remember when you arrived in our class and we got to know each other, it was clear that you knew you were ready to go, especially when it came to long duration flight and the experiments that were going to be done on space station, and that's where your career led you.
Yeah.
So let's talk about your career a little bit. We have some of Peggy's highlights that you can see here. First female commander of the International Space Station. She did 5, this is her second flight. She did 5 spacewalks on that flight. She then became the chief of the astronaut office. Well, we should talk a little bit more about that, but she was the first woman and the first civilian to do that. And there she is there at the final shuttle landing. She went back to space a 3rd time, and she set a record at that time for most time in space by a female in 1 mission, and shattered the record for total time in space. So my friend here that is sitting next to me has more time in space than any American, male or female, in the history of our space program.
Thank you. Thanks.
And that's your final landing there.
Yeah.
So you said record-setting astronaut, and that is certainly true. Out of all those accomplishments, is there one that sticks out for you?
For me, actually, I think probably becoming the first female and non-military chief of the astronaut office was probably the most meaningful to me, partly because it was maybe something I hadn't ever envisioned. You know, after I'd flown in space once, I thought, hey, I could command the station, and it worked out, and I got to be the first female commander, which wasn't as important to me as actually being the commander. But being the first female chief of the office was a big deal. I think probably more so that I was non-military.
Yeah.
Mike and I are civilians, and astronaut office is about half and half civilian versus military. And so it was, and all previous chief astronauts had been military. And so I think there was a lot of people that were a little nervous when I took over.
To me, that was, I think, very significant for me to see you do that as well, because up to that point, it had always been a military test pilot dude who was the chief astronaut, who was the boss. And I think it also, to me, symbolized a change in our program, getting into more of the long duration flights and exploring further out into from low Earth. We were concentrating low Earth orbit, but then moving on from that is the plan. And I think that's, to me, that's what your assignment to that job meant. It was very meaningful, not just the first female, but also the first civilian, which is very significant. And there you are, having fun there. All right, so let's back up a little bit now to the beginning of our training. It took us a while to get into the office, and then what I really see, you concentrate so much on getting there, and we show up, but you get the realization you haven't done anything yet. And you work so hard to get to that position, and now it's time to really perform. And there were things that we did that weren't necessarily easy, I think, for both of us. And we were talking about this. We kind of hit on the same thing, which
water survival training and we had to have dive training and water survival training in case of ejection, and it was a serious challenge for me. I passed beginner's swim lesson, I think, as a kid, and so I was definitely in remedial swimming lessons before all the water survival training happened for us.
Yeah, we were in there together. You do all these things to become an astronaut, and then you show up, and they warn you about this when you get accepted, that you're going to have to pass a swim test. And I was not a very strong swimmer, and I was kind of horrified that I was going to have to what they tell them. But I was also kind of glad that they didn't ask me that during the interview. Out of these 10 years of trying, I was never asked, how well do you swim? And so we had to get ready. And I remember one of my first memories of getting to know Peggy was after our first week, because we were going to have to do our swim test the second week of our training. We all got together, the weak swimmers and the strong swimmers in our class got together, and that, I think, was also a symbol of our teamwork. It was at your house, in the backyard in your pool, and we got swim lessons from the stronger swimmers in our class, and we all got through that swim test as a result.
Yep,
we did it all together. So, yeah. Okay, what's next? We have, going back now even a little further, going back to the inspiration behind all this. You and I are around the same age, and although you look much younger as a result. But we're around the same age. We both can remember the moon landing.
Yeah.
And to me, that set the bit in my head that would be the job. I had no idea how it would happen. I didn't, as years went on, I thought this will never happen. But that's what inspired me. You had a similar thing, but with a bit of a twist to it. Yeah,
I was 9 when Neil Armstrong and Buzz Aldrin took those first steps on the moon, and I was, as a 9-year-old, that is just that has got to be the coolest job ever. So that's what I wanted to do. I dreamed of being an astronaut. Of course, I wasn't telling a lot of people because I was an Iowa farm kid, so who would have ever thought that I could be an astronaut? But then the year I graduated from high school was the year they picked the first female astronauts. And I'm like, wow, maybe I can. And one of them happened to be a biochemist. And I was like, I'm interested in biology and chemistry, and maybe this will work out. This could be really cool. And so I think that's when it changed from being a dream into being a goal for me, was at that point in life. And luckily, I had no idea how hard it'd be to get in to be an astronaut, so I just kept plugging away.
Yeah, sometimes you're better, if you knew how hard it was, it might have made it. You don't want to, sometimes you're better off not knowing.
Exactly. But going after your goal, no one else can know what is right for you. And there were a lot of people along the way that suggested maybe, that astronaut thing was just a flash in the pan, or, that I was making the biggest mistake in my life. I was told both of those things by some very prestigious people, and luckily, I just ignored them. I really would have loved to call them from the space station and told them not so much.
Yeah, that would have been good. But yeah, you got to follow your heart. And the roads each of us take are different, and there's no one path.
That's right.
And you just make the best decisions you can, follow what you're interested in, and try and not give up, and good things happen. And all that perseverance that it took to become an astronaut, to get through the training, the swim lessons, the whole bit, whatever. There's a lot of other stuff there too, led to space travel, and all of us as astronauts have had challenging things happen in space. And Peggy's up there, has been up there for so long that she's had many challenges. Which one stands out for you? Tell us a little bit about what happened here.
Well, I think probably the biggest challenge for me was when I was the first female commander on board the space station. I'd been on board and in command for less than a month. And we had a shuttle arrive, and we were doing some manipulation of the structure outside. We have a football field length structure, and we were adding a solar array to the end of the structure. The arrays had been collapsed, accordion folded down into a blanket box, and 115 feet of a solar array fits in a blanket box this tall. And it's because it's paper thin. So it's accordion folded inside this box for 115 feet. And it had been folded up, and we placed it with the robotic arm, and then from the inside, I was commanding it to deploy. And then the first array, I deployed, no problem, everything's fine. Second array, I deployed, I got it about 80% out, and it started to tear. So I'm aborting, and of course it takes several seconds for the signal to get out to the end of the truss, and in the meantime, then a tear occurred in the array about 6 feet long. And we're like, how are we ever going to fix this? Because it's really out there on the end, at the very end of the truss, and it's a huge tear. And if we continue to deploy it, we'll tear it more. And there's no way that it was going to refold into that very thin accordion folded blanket box again. There was no way it was going to go back inside. And the shuttle couldn't undock with the array partially deployed because it could, the vibrations from the shuttle undocking could potentially break the array off, and it could hit the shuttle, it could hit the station. So we were—
Big problem.
This was huge. And I mean, the next mission to come up was bringing a new scientific module from Europe, and we wouldn't have the power for it if we didn't have the arrays. So it was either jettison and throw this array away, and I'd be responsible for ruining international partnerships forever, or fix it. And luckily, the amazing team on the ground came up with what I think is a very, very simple idea. They said, how about we just build some cufflinks? Because up there in space, we don't exactly have a Home Depot or a Lowe's where I could go buy something that I needed. We had to make it from what we had. So we ended up cutting metal and making these cufflinks out of just metal and cut wire. We were cut the metal, punched holes in it. We were filing it off here in front of a vacuum cleaner because the metal fragments would get in your eyes. And then we got a couple of guys ready to go out, EVA, and we did the sportiest ever robotics with a space station arm attached to a shuttle inspection arm. That's wheels at the base of the solar array. You can see it mostly deployed, and then most of the way up, you can see that tear. And in order to get him out there, we had to have this convoluted arm configuration to make it. And we got Scott all the way out there, and he's like, can you get me any closer? And we're like, no, you gotta lean. Because we had everything out there. But he was able to install those little cufflinks. You can see the 5 along the array. And it was all caused by a frayed wire that tore that. But in the end, we were able to deploy that array fully. And by the end of the day, we had 97% power.
Good enough.
Yeah,
Excellent.
Good enough.
Yeah, it was quite exciting to watch this. I was training for my second flight while they were doing this, and we were watching and seeing what was happening, and it was really quite dramatic, that whole repair. One of the most challenging things we ever had to do, and the team came through.
Absolutely.
And you're like you said, you're stuck there without any Home Depot. What are we going to do to get the job done? And I think it's an example of what the control center can do for us. And you know, just like the people in this room support their customers are there when they need help, we have the control center to help us. And sometimes it's on the spot in the moment. On my flight, I made a terrible mistake. It's something I couldn't believe I had done after I had done this. I stripped a screw on when I was trying to repair an instrument, and there was no way to continue with the repair. And I realized what had happened. I had stripped this screw. This handrail wasn't going to come off. I wouldn't be able to access the power supply. We wouldn't bring this scientific instrument on the Hubble Space Telescope back to life. We would never find out if there was life in the universe, and everyone in the world would be blaming me. You were going to get blamed for international issues.
Yes.
I was going to get blamed. And they would quote me, and my kids would be reading in the astronomy books in the future. We would know how old the universe is, but Gabby and Daniel's dad broke the Hubble Space Telescope. So I felt terrible about this, and the control center sprang into motion and came up with a solution, which seems simple. They just had me rip this piece of metal off. I had to tape the bottom of it, and it sounds simple, but it's not something we would normally do.
No, not when you're dealing with scientific hardware.
Especially
very expensive.
Very expensive that we all paid for through our tax dollars. That any debris going up in there or hitting me could cause a problem, so they had me tape. But they came through on the spot, and you had another on your last flight, and that 288-day one. You had a similar experience.
Yeah, in my particular situation, Shane and I were out doing a spacewalk, and we were installing these micrometeoroid shields over a node end cone, which was going to be bare, and it had to have this thermal protection on it. And we had taken out these large, 5 feet long shields, and we had to unbundle them. There were 4 of them, and we had to unbundle them. And everything in space has to be tethered because there's zero gravity and it'll float away from you. So you have to have everything tethered. And so we checked the tethers. I was installing them, we're checking them, installing, checking. And then we went through and we checked again, and everything tethered. And then we broke the bundle apart, and a few seconds later, Shane's like, I don't have a shield. And I'm like, I thought he was joking with me. I'm like, we checked them, and we double-checked them, we triple-checked them. And he's like, and I thought, well, maybe it just floated behind him or something. He couldn't see it. And I'm looking, and I'm like, nope. And then I see it floating away. Yeah.
And that's when you realize space is a very large place.
Oh, my gosh.
It is really gone.
It's gone. Yeah. There was no way. I wasn't even tempted to jump after it, not even the slightest. But it was very gone. And while we were doing the EVA, so we continued. We installed the 3 that we could and had some other tasks we had to do. And while we were doing that, on the ground, in mission control, these guys had things laid out in one of the back rooms. So they were trying to figure out alternative ways they could cover up the hole that we had left in this, covering the hatch. And they just came up with a solution that involved a piece of MLI, which is multi-layer insulation, that I had pulled off of another end cone that was there for a different reason. And I had struggled and struggled to shove that thing into a bag. And then they said at the end, so Peg, we got the good news and bad news. We got an idea, we got a plan, but you got to take that thing out of the bag again. But it was a lot easier to get out than it was to get in. So we got it out, and we had to cover up this hole, but it was dark, and there were no lights on us, so the ground couldn't see. And so it was all that teamwork and communication from the ground in order to make it successful. And then they said when the sun came up, the light shone on it, and they're like, oh, it's perfect. It's just like how we thought it was going to be. So it was great. But again, it was mission control that did it. And they came up with a solution real time. It wasn't the perfect solution, but it worked, and it was timely. And sometimes it's not the most elegant solution. It's just the one that works is the best one.
There are 2 things that strike me about that. You can applaud if you like. I thought I heard applaud that. It's fine. You can do that anytime you like. Saving the day again. But there's 2 things that strike me about that. One is that when you make a mistake like that, you feel awful.
Yeah.
But you're outside spacewalking and you're doing something that is important and people are counting on you. You kind of have to put that mistake behind you. As bad as unthinkable, and that's kind of like a nightmare when something like that happens. I cannot believe that happened. You kind of have to put that, was that what you were, did you have to consciously do that?
Absolutely. And it was interesting because the ground team told me afterwards that everybody in mission control sat for a second and was like, what? What the hell are we going to do, you know?
Yeah.
And I spotted the shield floating away, and anytime you lose something, you're never supposed to lose anything, but anytime you lose something, you're supposed to tell them what direction it's going and how fast and all that. And so I called out and told them that.
Yeah.
And then they said everybody sprung into action.
Yeah.
So they were going through the same panic that I had. And it was like, we lost
But
it.
it's happened. Let's not make it worse.
Right.
And we'll figure out a
Right.
way. And they came up with a solution
Right.
for
No,
you.
it was perfect.
And I think it also shows the dedication. Sometimes you don't, you know that team is there. When you make a mistake, sometimes you forget that help is there, because they're away from you, they're down on the ground.
Right.
But they're so dedicated to help, just like all of you are, to help the people you're working with. But sometimes it's easy to forget that, and then we're reminded of it. And the thing that struck me about that team was, I felt like over the years I learned that our success was their success.
Yeah.
And that's unusual. They wanted us to be successful, and if we had a problem, it was their problem, and they weren't going to leave us out to hanging out to dry. They were going to do whatever they could to help us, and I think that's a great story. Cool. All right, you can see some of those people there. All right. Now, all right, this I like this. All right, so a lot of astronauts get nicknames, and some are really cool, and some are not so cool, and some you're happy with, and some you're not happy with. My astronaut nickname was Mass. It was just short for my last name, Massimino. So it wasn't much creativity on that one, but you have a really cool one. Peggy's nickname is...
Actually...
No.
No.
What is it? It's
Space Ninja.
Space Ninja, yes, Space Ninja.
And I actually...
That's a cool nickname.
I had actually not gotten away with not getting a nickname for most of my career.
Yeah,
and
you
on
just Peg.
Yeah. On my last space flight, I broke all the cumulative time in space records for every U.S. astronaut. And the young gentleman that was flying with me, Jack Fisher, he's a nickname kind of guy, and Two Fish is his nickname. He came up with the Space Ninja nickname, and it was his whole goal throughout the mission to try and get mission control to call me the Space Ninja, which by the end of the mission they finally did. So he was pleased.
So now you know what astronauts are really thinking about. How can I get mission control to call Peggy? But that is a very cool nickname. All right, so let's move on to the human element and diversity, right? And we think of diversity, I think what comes to mind when I hear it is we're thinking about diversity in gender and in ethnicity. But I think at NASA it was those things. Yeah. But it was also an importance to get the job done, to accomplish these amazing things, was to have diversity of thought and of culture. And tell us a little bit about that.
So I agree very much. I think the strength of NASA is having those different thought processes. And it's not just those thought processes, as you said, of gender or ethnicity. But on board the International Space Station, this whole vehicle, which is the length of a football field long, the pressurized section is greater than a 747. It's got 15 school bus-sized modules connected together for that pressurized section. Each of the solar array wings is 115 feet long. It was built in space, traveling at 17,500 miles an hour. And that and from pieces and parts that came from all over the world. I think that's just a huge testament of what that kind of a diversity can bring together and the capability that we have. And, you know, on a much smaller scale on board the space station, you know, as crews, we, you know, tried to engender and promote those differences because it is important. And I think the strength of the astronaut office is having those different thought processes, because you have a biochemist, you have an engineer, you have a pilot, you have some guy that, you know, ran tanks. There's all different kinds of backgrounds and approaches to problems and how to solve things. And I really think that makes NASA very strong. and very good at problem solving. And so I really appreciate that perspective of what space has given us.
Yeah, it's pretty. I remember one of our first briefings on the space station when we were new astronauts, and I remember sitting in the classroom listening to all these pieces that had to fit together from all over the world. And this was before we had anything launched. We were 98 was the first time we launched a piece of equipment for the space station, and so we became astronauts in '96. And I remember listening to this. I'm like, this. I didn't vocalize this, but I was like, there's no way this is going to work, especially because of all the international pieces that had to come together. But it
and you
did.
can imagine the software problems we had.
Yeah, exactly.
There were a few, a lot of them along the way that had to be overcome. Spurious caution alarms or warning alarms going off in the middle of the night. You're trying to figure out what was going on, and just different messages getting mixed up, going and crossing over the connections between the modules. So it was very interesting.
But all those startups, those startup problems, that we were able to solve those. And I remember Alan Bean, the moonwalker, came and spoke to our class early on. I remember he said something that related to this, about the diversity of thought, that he said if everyone thinks the same way, they would have never gotten to the moon. You have to have people who think differently, and if everyone thinks the same way, you'll never build space station. You need that diversity, and you need to be open to it. You may not agree with what someone else is saying, but you need to be open to hear it, because that's the only way you're going to do these big things that we're trying to do, these impossible things.
And it is the human element that makes every group stronger, in my opinion.
Yeah, getting that all to work together. Okay. We're going to talk a little more about mission control here and about the help we get, the protection we get. I know the audience here is here about protecting their clients, their organizations, their colleagues from threats. And we had the control center not only helping us with getting our job done and coming up with these really great ideas to make us successful, but also keeping us safe.
Yes, yeah. And so, and there are intricate procedures that the mission control has to follow to help protect and make sure that we are protected on board. And from the being in space perspective, it was relatively easy because we're relatively isolated from the rest of the world and don't have a big impact. But obviously, we couldn't have anyone hacking into the space station and commanding it to go somewhere else that we didn't want it to go. So it was very important to have all those humans involved and those very detailed procedures meticulously guiding us and protecting us while we're on board.
Yeah, it was nice because we didn't have to necessarily worry about all that stuff.
No.
And I think that's what these great people in our audience here do, is they take care of that security so that their clients can worry about what they need to worry about, which is doing their job. We didn't have to worry about these threats, whether it was micrometeorites or some other kind of cyber threat, whatever it might be. We knew that was taken care of. Our equipment was going to be taken care of, and that bond it's kind of like a trust that you have with them. Yeah, that you have that trust that they'll take care of that part of it, and we'll concentrate on doing our job, which was a great way to go to work.
It absolutely is. But we did lots of things, even on board. For instance, we had a systems network, command and control network, that was obviously controlled to a much higher degree than, for instance, we had a separate, completely independent, separate network for the crews so that we could, check email or, do our own personal things. We had, I would call dial-up speed internet, but it was not anything to shake a stick at, but, it was separate from all our systems and critical information. That helped us define and allow us to have something as a crew member when you're living up there for months, to have access to your family and friends that way. It was pretty important to us. So having the appropriate security levels for the appropriate activities that you're doing is very, very important, even in space.
Yeah, and I think that was a big step, because your first flight, you didn't have that. You were still doing email syncs probably and things like that, right? That's what we did on the shuttle, where email would go down twice a day and come up twice a day. And now it's more of a, not necessarily as you say instantaneous, but still you're able to,
Nearly.
get the email and then send one, similar to the way you would do here on Earth. And that's so important to be able to do that because it keeps you connected with your family and your friends, and you don't feel, as you say, isolated. So that's huge. It's not just securing of data and so on, but it's also, I think, a morale issue in keeping the crew connected.
It absolutely is, and I never felt isolated on board the space station. We have what's called an internet protocol phone. I'm sure you guys know what that is. But anyway, I could call down to Earth anytime and talk to family and friends, and I never felt isolated. Even on my first flight, I was able to call my mom, and I called her from the International Space Station the first time, says, will you accept a collect call from the International Space Station? She's like, I can't believe you're really up there. Of course, at that time, our delay was pretty good. You had to have a couple of second delay for the conversation, so you had to get used to the timing. And since then, it's improved quite a bit, and not so much of a delay. But I think, it's going to be very different in our future exploration, because you're not going to have those same things happening.
Yeah. Okay, our beautiful planet. And these are some amazing views taken from space station. Seeing our Earth from space, for me, was life-changing. And it's a paradise, and I can't imagine any place being more beautiful. My flights, though, were 2 weeks at a time, and a lot of spacewalking and other things. Not that much time looking out the window. Maybe a couple days. We got delayed by weather. I was able to enjoy the view, but you were up there for 665 days total.
Yeah.
How did that change you from your first flight to you've gotten to see more of our planet than anyone. What was that like?
It is always gorgeous. I mean, you just don't get tired of looking at it. As we're going around the Earth's precessing under us 15 degrees, so you're always looking at a little bit different piece of the Earth. The sun and the lighting is a little bit different, so it doesn't ever get old, because you'll always find something you never saw before, even though you'd been maybe over this place on the Earth many, many times. But what really impresses me and strikes me a lot about looking at our planet Earth is realizing that this Earth has, oxygen, removes carbon dioxide, provides a temperature range that's livable. It gives us an environment that is safe for us to live in, protected from radiation. All these things are provided by planet Earth. And especially when you're up in an artificial space station and, things are not working the way they should all the time. You're having to fix the toilet, and the, carbon dioxide removal system's not always working. It gives you a huge respect for what this planet has and what it provides for us. And the atmosphere is so thin and so small a part of our planet that it just really gives me an appreciation for what we have down here. And I like to call it Spaceship Earth, because this is the best spaceship right down here, and we're just trying to replicate something up there, which is going to enable us to go to other places, but it's challenging. And recognizing those challenges makes it really interesting for us. But the other thing that always strikes me about looking out the window is when you look away from the planet. And this is a time-lapse photography taken during my last mission of the Milky Way. And that's just one galaxy. It's our galaxy. And you can see there are thousands and thousands and thousands and thousands of stars. And when you realize that we are one of billions and billions and billions of galaxies, it gives you this other perspective. So you go from looking at planet Earth, where this is our world, this is everything, this is all of us. And then you look out and you see this huge expanse and realize, we're not even a grain of sand in the cosmos. It gives you a really interesting perspective. And for me, that overview effect of what we see from space is really enlightening and definitely has changed how I think about our planet and where we are in the cosmos.
So do you think I've never asked Peggy this question. Do you think we're alone?
Absolutely not. I feel there around all those stars or planets. You know, we had the Kepler planet hunter out there, and in less than a couple years came up with like 3,000 or 4,000 potentially habitable places. So no, I think we will definitely find life out there. It's not necessarily going to look like us, but we will find life out there, and it's just by the numbers has to be true.
Yeah, when you think of all the possibilities, there almost has to be something else out there. But it struck me while I was during one of my spacewalks looking at our planet that, yeah, there probably is something else out there, but I don't know if there's anything quite as beautiful as our planet.
Yeah.
And if we find some other living place, we should challenge them to a beauty contest for planets. I think we will win because it's such that beautiful. All right, another picture of the moon. We were talking about this earlier. It's space station. The first element launch was 1998, but the first time we had humans on board was in 2000.
Yeah.
We're coming up on the 20th anniversary of always having people in space. So that means all our kids, teenagers, kids in school now have grown up in a world where there's always humans in space. We've had that permanent presence. We hopefully have a lot of good years left on the space station, but where do you think we're headed next?
Well, obviously everybody's heard of the Artemis program and heading back to the moon, and I think that's really, really important stepping stone for us. I think we need to learn, in order to do planetary exploration, for instance, on Mars, we have to test a few things out on the moon, because the moon's only 4 days away, whereas Mars, with conventional engines, is 6 to 9 months away. So, you know, if something happens or goes wrong, we can get back from the moon relatively quickly, but we can't get back from Mars quickly, not at all. We either go and stay for a month or go and stay for a year because of the way the planets line up. It's just going to take you too long otherwise. So you need to have a good working system. You don't want to have a lot of broken toilets going in. You need to know, and you need to know how to, like for instance, on board the space station, we're doing 3D modeling and building, you know, with 3D printing, different things. And we're going to have to be able to do a lot of that sort of thing in the future. And it's going to be really important incorporating not only international partners, but our commercial partners too. I think that's going to be really important in our future because it's going to take all of us together. Going to space is really expensive, but it challenges us to do so much more. It challenges us to find new solutions and develop our technologies that benefit here on Earth as well as in space.
Yeah, it's a huge step. The moon, you think the moon is next though, yeah? And then on to Mars. Because Mars, you know, when we talked about the help from the control center, we were just a couple seconds away being in low Earth orbit. When you're on the moon, it's still just a couple seconds. But you go to Mars and we're talking about a round trip delay for getting help from the control center of about
40 minutes.
40 minutes. So you're going to say, Houston,
way.
we have a problem. And 40 minutes later, someone's going to say, oh, what was that? You know, you're going to have to be able to figure stuff out on your own. And that's going to be a huge jump. Yeah.
Big challenge.
Yeah. You know, so we're dreaming about going to these places. These are some Hubble images, star nursery, birth of star and a dying star on the right. And these are images taken by the Hubble Space Telescope that I got to work on. Magnificent machine that takes us to places we can only dream about going. You know, we're able to send probes to these different places, rovers on Mars and so on, and Hubble shows us where we can go, but we need a better way to travel to get out to these places. We can admire them from a distance.
Yeah, we definitely need warp drive. That's another leap. Warp drive.
Yeah, warp drive.
Warp drive.
So for now, you know, the moon and Mars, and then eventually warp drive. All right, so we're almost out of time here, Peg. We have this wonderful group of people here. Thank you for having us. But let's finish with this. If you had one piece of advice for all these nice people here that have been listening to us, what is it?
Okay, so I think this is important no matter what your age is. you have to live a little bit outside your comfort zone. So, and this is me inside a cargo bag. You got to get out of your cargo bag and get your act together, because there is so much more to life, and you can't even always know what it's going to be. So challenge yourself to live outside the comfort. Live outside what's easy for you. Do something that's hard for you. Don't be afraid of failure, because the failures will make you even stronger the next time you try. Good luck.